No mai haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Glory of Our Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups. Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Welcome to Cult Chat. Today I'm delighted that we have a guest here with us called Andre Jackson. Now, I've met Andre in Barcelona at the Cult Conference, and he gave a presentation on his PhD and dissertation on a topic called waking up. And he was looking at the former Jehovah Witness Bethelite community members who had left. After that presentation, I went up to Andre and I said I'd really love to talk further about this work. And so we've got him today here on Cult Chat so you can listen in and hear about some of his experiences and his research. So we'll be having 3 episodes with Andre. The first 2 will be looking at Jehovah Witness, the structure, the organisation, cultic practices and behaviours, and some of their top sort of doctrines and dogma that they're well known for. And Kaz, Lindy and myself will have some discussion around that. And then in episode 3, we will be getting into something very exciting called the Waking Up Research Project that Andre has just completed through 2024. Now, that's the concept of being in a cult and where your mind begins to wake up, you begin to realise that there's something not quite right and it leads you on an out journey. So I'm really interested to see the parallels with a lot of the other cults that we talk about on Cult Chat. So make sure you join us and set aside time for all 3 episodes. So, Andre, there's a long introduction. I'm going to throw the floor to you. Can you just tell us briefly a little bit about yourself, and then let's have a chat about the Jehovah Witnesses to start with.
Excellent. Yes, and thank you very much, Liz. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, so as you said, my name's Andre. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. I was raised in Germany. My mom became a Jehovah's Witness when I was like 7 years old in Germany. She had just gone through a separation with my father. Was alone with me. Somebody knocked on her door and had some good news to share with her. So 3 years later, she became a Jehovah's Witness. As a result, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that I had serious questions that required serious answers. And I tried to find answers, did a lot of research, reached out within the organization, within my own congregation, and then reached out to the national headquarters, wrote letters, was eventually invited to a serious meeting with my local elders. And at the end of that meeting, I was told that they would not want to meet with me to talk about the Bible, and I've never been back.
Andre, did you not get the memo that you really can't ask questions in these kind of groups?
Yeah, it's really interesting, like how before you commit yourself, there's the impression that questions are encouraged, that you can really, do your research, make sure that you're personally convinced. But once you are a member and you are committed, questioning is really discouraged. It goes, maybe a first iteration, people, and that's happened to me, people will offer to help you. They will do a quick search through the approved materials that the organization has published, and that's where it ends. You have to accept that. If you have further questions, or if you don't understand or disagree, that's when you get in trouble.
Yeah, interesting. You pointed out that you joined as a child, and I've been reading some research, characteristics into former Jehovah Witnesses in Austria, Germany, Switzerland. It's about health and well-being in particular. And the research showed that of the people they interviewed, like 66% were born in, and then 17% were between 1 and 13 years old, and then another 6% 14 to 18 years old, and then only 10% of people joining were 19 and older, so more adults. So really, you're looking at 90% have either been born in or were there not because of their own decision. And so you were
Correct.
7,
Yeah.
so you would have been quite a lot of your thinking patterns and who you were would have been formed by the group. Is that fair?
Yes. So for one, yes, absolutely. It seems that the vast majority of witnesses are witnesses or associate because they're quote unquote born in, because their parents are witnesses. It's very rare for adults to convert, certainly in the industrialized world. And yeah, so my mom started studying when I was 4 and became a baptized witness when I was 7. So I do remember 1 or 2 Christmas trees. But I also remember, like, when I was in kindergarten, that things stopped. Like, you cannot celebrate birthdays anymore, no Christmas, no Easter, no Valentine's, like none of that. Like, that stopped. But because I was so young and didn't have like an emotional attachment and many memories, it was not so difficult for me. My stepsister, who's 4 years older than me, she experienced the change, and it was as a result more difficult for her to she never became a witness, but like to be in that environment, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah, because
Yeah.
your formative years are forming what's normal in your culture, and in many ways, joining the Jehovah's Witness was a new expression of a culture. And so for you,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, which is interesting. Culture, there's a link there between these words, clearly. And, we are called Cult Chat. And I recall us having a discussion prior to this. How do you feel about the Jehovah Witness being called a cult? Is it something you have a sensitivity around? And I got the very distinct impression from you. You felt it was an important word, it has a meaning, and the Jehovah Witness fits that. Can you talk to me about why you think it's important to use that word and what we mean by it and why it fits?
Yeah, for sure. It was really interesting when I started doing my research to realize that there is a whole section of researchers and literature who are essentially cult apologists. They try to steer away from the word. They say it has negative connotations, and that terms like new religious movement are more appropriate because the only difference from their perspective is that they're new, a little esoteric, a little radical maybe, but just not as well established, not as well known, and that's the only difference. I disagree with that. I think cults, while it is a term with negative connotations, I think it is deserved because there is serious harm caused by cults. And that is one of the distinguishing features from my perspective. I mean, it's on a spectrum. There's a gradient, and it's really difficult to firmly say where the line is. And there's still a lot of conversations around the definition of the term cult. What are the identifying characteristics? There's different models out there, and I think that is something that some of these groups seize on. Like when you go to jw.org, the website of Jehovah's Witnesses, on their FAQ, there's a section, the question, are we a cult? And they provide their own definition and say, we don't meet this definition, so we're not a cult.
Oh, of course they do. However, with the various models there are, if you're looking at the Bite model, Steve Hassan, or you look at the bounded choice model, Jan Jelilich, do you have any difficulty fitting the Jehovah Witness in there squarely?
Not really. I mean, some models, yes, because some models describe or prescribe a cult to have a singular person as leader, and the Jehovah's Witnesses have a governing body of leaders. And that's one of those things where they're like, yeah, we're not a cult, and like according to that model, they wouldn't meet all the criteria. I think it's more useful to look into what a cult does, what a group does to determine if they're a cultic group or not, which is where some of the synonyms to call it, like high control group or high control religion, high demand religion, are somewhat appropriate synonyms, because when you focus on the control and the demand aspect, that gives you the flexibility, because people or groups may control their members differently. They may use different control mechanisms, but ultimately there's always an element of control, of undue influence, of exploitation even.
Brilliant. Yeah, can we springboard to that? Control mechanisms. Can you give me some examples of those within the Jehovah Witness faith? And you just mentioned exploitation as well. And I know there is a big body of physical labour that is volunteered by the members. Let's think about the creation of a new kingdom hall, for example. Like, it won't be there one week and it will be there in a town the next week. They've clearly come together, but surely they're just coming together. It's fun time. It's like church camp, and they would be horrified to think that we would think that there was any level of coercion or exploitation going on there. Are you able to shine any light on the expectations on people?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, and it's true. Like, if you ask a member, like if I were to ask my mom, she wouldn't view it as exploitation. Like, she does it voluntarily. She feels she's getting something out of it. But if you take a step back and look into, I guess, the actual value flow, the exchange between the organization and the members. Among Jehovah's Witnesses, for sure, the members provide donations, labor, their time and energy to the organization. And what they get back in return is always, quote unquote, spiritual. It's spiritual food. It's a spiritual paradise. It's a spiritual family. It's made up. If people believe enough in it, and there may be an emotional response, and they may feel joy and belonging and purpose, and those are meaningful things. But it's not like, for an outsider, it's easy to see, I guess, that it's not necessary to donate so much of your time and energy to an organization to feel a sense of belonging to a group, to feel some purpose.
Yes. The research that I was looking at, that I referenced earlier, I think from memory, on average, people were giving 15 to 16 hours a week to the organisation, but these were people who left at the average age was 29 years in the group. So we were looking at people who were probably in their 30s, heading into their 40s. And I'm thinking, it's quite a lot of time to be giving to a group. How many meetings a week would be an expectation to attend? Or
currently, there are 2 meetings per week where the congregations meet as a congregation in a building that they call Kingdom Hall. In addition to that, there's often time spent on recruiting activities. Just going back to, I guess, the value flow, just to put some numbers behind that. And some of that information is from the Jehovah's Witnesses website. It's very useful, and I used a lot of that in my research, because witnesses will feel a tendency to reject any kind of information that is negative or makes them appear in a negative light. If the source of the information is not they themselves. They will just reject it as uninformed or as being influenced by the devil, and then they put the fingers in their ears and sing la la la. But some of the information is on their own website, in their own print material. So in terms of labor donations, for example, at the time when I did my research, in the previous 15 years, with their voluntary labor, they built 28,000 kingdom halls.
Oh, wow.
That's quite a lot, yes.
Can you tell me how many Jehovah's Witnesses there are worldwide? Have you got any memory of stats?
Yeah. There's currently around 9 million Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, it's enormous, isn't it? It's a really big organisation. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses. You mentioned earlier that they don't have a cult leader, but there was a man who started the Jehovah's Witnesses, and the fact that he's not alive anymore, and there might be a leadership group now, but he must have been an interesting man, and he's obviously set up this group and this religion, and it's morphed over time. But tell me about this man. Tell me a bit about the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Very interesting origin. The founder was Charles Taze Russell. The Jehovah's Witnesses were then called Bible students, I think. I think this was changed in the 30s under the second leader, and big part of that change was that he wanted to distinguish himself from the founder. What's really interesting is that Jehovah's Witnesses almost have a cousin religion. The Seventh-day Adventists and the Witness are very, very similar. And that's because the founders were both influenced by the Adventist movement, by the Millerites, which is very, very interesting. There's other groups. The Witnesses think they're very unique, but even some of their unusual doctrines, say like the 144,000 or the use of the name Jehovah, there's other groups who also use these names. The Witnesses themselves have had numerous splinter groups, which most witnesses are not aware of over the years. And apparently there's even a covert group within the Witnesses that takes issue with the blood doctrine. They have not splintered off, but overall, I think there have been around 20 documented organizational splits with other groups, and some of those are still around. It's really interesting.
Fascinating. That's interesting. You mentioned the blood doctrine. We just had a series of episodes on healthcare with Gina Katana, and that was one that was mentioned because she is now a medical professional herself, and she often gets used to come in and try and talk to families who are from cults who are struggling with these big decisions around the blood post-birth and other issues. You also mentioned there's splinter groups and that not all people involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses really know about it. Now, is that because there's a bit of censoring around information and control? And, did J-Dubs get online and look up, is J-Dub a cult?
No, they do not. There's a very strong culture of not doing that. And I think this is compacted or accentuated. It's made worse by the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses are, generally speaking, very, very busy doing Jehovah's Witness stuff. The key things that they're expected to do revolve around studying and consuming the organization's propaganda, print material, the videos, attend meetings, and recruit. In order to attend the meetings, most of these meetings are set up like almost like a classroom kind of setting with somebody on stage. It's very catechistic. Material is read together. There's a reader on stage who reads the material in paragraphs. Most paragraphs come with a question. Then the question is asked, and then people in the auditorium may participate if they're in good standing, and essentially regurgitate the material in the paragraph that was just read. And a lot of the studying that witnesses do is preparing for these meetings. So they will sit at home, read the material with a highlighter. It's a really interesting thing, like culturally speaking.
Yes.
How you prepare the material may affect how people in the organization view you. Like some people make sure that the material is prepared in a way that's very visible, with highlighters and red underlined. So when people sit around you, next to you, behind you, they can see that you've prepared the watchtower.
Because cults always have the sense that everybody is looking at you. Everybody feels like they're in the goldfish bowl, don't they? And so you're saying this is a way to increase your kudos, get your brownie points up.
Yeah, and you will be judged, right? But like as a result, you need to read the material. Then you read the question, you read the material again to try and find the answer. Then you sit in the meeting. So there's a lot of repetition. And a lot of that activity keeps people very, very busy. And it's really interesting, like to realize, between the time I first went to Jehovah's Witnesses meetings, I mean, I learned how to read and write, mostly how to read, using Jehovah's Witnesses material. Between that moment and the time I left, the hundreds, the thousands of meetings I attended, all of these meetings, even the ones that are called study, are designed in a way that you just give answers to the person on stage. It's never the case that you ask a question.
No.
Which is really interesting. Like that never happens. So, but you're so busy and you think that you're doing so much studying. A lot of these books are called study. There's a lot of references to learning and teaching and studying that, it never once crossed my mind to just Google Jehovah's Witnesses or go to Wikipedia and look ourselves up. If we have a question, we as a person as a Jehovah's Witness, if they have a question about anything related to Jehovah's Witnesses, they will look at Jehovah's Witnesses material. They have history books about themselves. So if you're curious about like how it all started, there's a book for that. If you have a question about dogma, there's a book for that. You have questions about science, there's books for that, right? So there, as a result, it does not happen much that witnesses look elsewhere for information.
No, and the repetition, it just embeds the indoctrination in you, and you become like just a regurgitating rabbit, don't you? Which is interesting because when you have a Jehovah's Witness come to your door, I'm a person of Christian faith, and my husband, he really loves discussions, but it doesn't take long where we'll put out some questions that we know will trap them. There's actually some very easy ways that Christians can say, go to this verse, this verse, this verse. Now, who is Jehovah in this verse? And who is Jehovah? Who's God in this verse? And they go, and they blank look at you. I'll have to get back to you. Well, they scurry away and we don't see them again. Because there's no capacity to go outside they haven't thought it through themselves. They've learned something off by heart.
Exactly. There's so much repetition. It's a form of indoctrination. So witnesses know what they believe, but not necessarily why.
Why? Amazing.
They have their proof text for their beliefs, and if they're confronted with somebody who's also educated and well read in the Bible, but follows different faith tradition, or just brings up other verses. And there's plenty of evidence of that. There are some people who've made it their mission to preach to Jehovah's Witnesses. And they record these calls and they put them up on YouTube, and they've been doing this for over 10 years. So there is thousands of videos out there. And there is a pattern. There's a clear pattern. Like once witnesses are confronted with somebody who's actually well educated on the Bible, but disagrees with them, they usually don't have any desire to continue the conversation.
No. Well, the last group that turned up, believe it or not, it was 10-1, and it was our first Cult Chat episode was going live to the radio on a radio station, Plains FM. Shout out to your Plains FM. And I was really looking forward to it. I was counting down the time, and knock at the door, and there's Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm like, oh no, I've only got 10 minutes, and I really would love to engage, but I really can't. You'll never believe what I do. I said, I would so love to talk to you. I'm so sorry. I have to go at 1. But I said, look, I've got such a short amount of time. Look, can I just say that I work for the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust. Have you heard about Gloriavale? Now, everyone in New Zealand knows about Gloriavale. And the lady said, yes, I thought you looked familiar. And that's because we're often on the news and the media. And I said, look, you know what? I'm just going to be blunt with you. I've got real concerns about the Jehovah's Witness being a cult similar to Gloriavale. And her eyes just popped open. And I said, I know it sounds really blunt. I said, but I'm really concerned about some of the harmful practices that are used, the shunning in particular. I'm not sure if you know how psychologically distressing shunning is. It's a very, very cruel form. I said, and I know that there's involvement with the Royal Commission, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I don't have time to talk. I'd love you to come back. I said, but I'm on the radio station today at 1:00. We're just starting this new podcast called Cult Chat. And look, my homework for you is to go and look it up. Well, look, they couldn't back out of our drive quickly enough. But I still felt like in that small little bit of time, I was just able to share, I've got real concerns. I'm worried about you. Perhaps you need to go and have a little look at whether your organisation is harmful. So, we didn't win any awards that day for our witnessing endeavours, and neither did they come back. It's now been, and I'm just beginning to think it's been a year and a half. Are we up to we're probably up to, 50 something. They haven't come back.
You know what? So here's a tip, and it could well be that this is by design. So for those listeners who don't feel like the witnesses coming to them and trying, like sometimes if you're just kind, and I mean, I remember myself when I was out in the preaching work, if somebody's just kind and nice and listens to you, right? Witness will take note, right? Like they will write down whatever they feel is useful for potential follow-up conversations, right? Has children, is sick, cares about plans, was worried about the weather, and ideally they will come. There's going to be something in their recent Watchtower or Awake magazine, and they will come back and like, last time we met, you said you were concerned about this. Here is a magazine for you, and if you take kindly to that, will try and establish a doorstep Bible study with you and, continue on and try and convert you. So if somebody doesn't like that, but they don't find it in them to be crass, right? Or really ask, I mean, technically you could just ask to like put me on a do not call list. Then you're on a list. They're very, very bureaucratic. They have a lot of lists, a lot of forms. You could end up, and I suspect that's what happened to you. You're probably on a list.
I was inviting them back. I was keen, but they're not coming back to talk to us.
Things that also help is if there's certain things that make Jehovah's Witnesses suspect that you're an ex-witness who is speaking up and speaking out about the witnesses, and that you're an apostate. And that's the worst thing you can possibly be. So if you work terms in that are very Jehovah's Witnesses specific, like the governing body, or maybe Warwick, where the global headquarters is, where I'm like, okay, a regular person doesn't know that. The fact that this person knows means they know about Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're not positive. And then there's probably very little desire to come back.
Interesting. So can we flick to the Jehovah's Witness organization for a moment? You talked about global headquarters. We've talked about the Watchtower. Can you give us some context around the Bethelites? Because that was the basis for your research, which we'll be talking about in part 3. Just give us a quick structure of the group.
Yeah. So the leadership is a group of men, mostly white. There's one black man. Most of them are American. I think there's a European. I think one is, from Australia. I'm not exactly sure. I just can't help but notice there's not a lot of diversity, considering that they want to speak for a group that combines all the true worshippers of God on earth. Yeah. There is very little representation on the leadership level of people from Asia or the Middle East or Africa or South America. They don't like the idea, or they reject being viewed as an American religion, but that's really what it is. That's the leadership. They are in a compound called Bethel. Bethel is a biblical term, but it's not only used for the world headquarters, but also for the national branches. So there's one in Germany. There, like different countries, there's quite a few of them. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers off the top of my head, but all these compounds are called Bethel. And that is where the print material is being produced, where the videos are being produced, where the service desk is, like if a congregation has questions that they can't answer themselves. If things percolate up from further down in the hierarchy, it lands in Bethel.
Do you work your way up to Bethel? Is Bethel like the crowning glory for a Jehovah's Witness to go and work there and be involved in the print?
That's the way it's presented. Yes, it's pretty much a very prestigious institution. It is presented as something that is pretty much the best career path you could possibly pursue. It's mostly they mostly use men, young men. Women usually get in because they're married to a man who was invited, or if they have special skills that are required.
So they can live with a partner they're living on compound, is that right? In a community. Yes. So they may have their spouse, might they have children? Is it a family compound?
No children. I think I don't know that for a fact, but I'm quite confident that if a couple were to have children, they'd probably be asked to leave because it's all business. Yes. There is no facility for children there. Women in the organization have a very secondary role. They can do a lot of recruiting. That's pretty much where it stops. Cleaning and recruiting. After that, they're essentially attached to their husband. And in Bethel, that's not always the case. I mean, you could, some of these compounds are large, like small towns. And they have, like dentists in there, right? So it could be that if they need a new dentist or a new nurse, and here's a sister, a Jehovah's Witness woman who's qualified, and no man, she may be invited.
So it could be thousands of people in these compounds.
Yeah. There is a total of 23,000 Bethelites. Okay,
right. So it's a significant number of people working in there. So you've got Bethelites, and then you've got Kingdom Hall. You've got your local. You must have like national. Do they have national organisations countrywide?
Exactly. Yeah, so some of the countries or groups of countries, sometimes they're grouped together, have
Mhm.
their own Bethel, the branch,
Mm.
as witnesses will call it. And on the local level, there's congregations which have their own structure. In between are overseers that are called circuit overseer. Those are essentially branch managers. They
Okay.
relay what's happening from the branch to the
Mm.
congregation and the other way around. They're traveling overseers. They usually visit a congregation twice a year
Okay.
for a week. And their main objective when they come is to make sure the accounting is on point, that the
Mhm.
recruiting activities are on point, and then
Mhm.
people are in line with what the branch has relayed.
Gosh. And so, can we talk about that while we look to cruise out to the end of this first episode? Can we start to look at some of those key beliefs and ideas that are important to the Jehovah Witness, and I guess most importantly, the behaviours that you think tip them over into cultic activity?
Yeah, yeah. Oh my, where to start, right? There's so much.
I
I
know.
think one thing that may be interesting for the listeners in terms of the demands that the organization has to the members. So the organizational demands, right? When we talk about this value flow between the members and the organization, the group, those demands are usually presented as voluntary. Same as membership itself. Like it's
Mm.
up to the individual, right? There is no quota, um, there's no tithing. There's not a set percentage of how much of your income you have to donate. However, there's tremendous pressure to do some of those things, even if it's not quantified or written down necessarily. Um, and like I said early on, like the main demands of studying, meeting, and recruiting activities,
Yeah.
um, there are there are regular reminders of the privilege to donate and
Mm.
support your organization financially.
Mm.
That seems to have increased in frequency recently,
Mm.
um, which is interesting. Yeah, and I mean, they will take anything. Also, I think my nephew is giving a presentation on Jehovah's Witness, so I just recently went through all like the things that are really like a little interesting, if you will, right? Um, when it comes to the nations, witnesses will take everything. Like it's not only money, they will take your stock portfolio, they will take your will, your real estate. You can donate hotel points or frequent flyer miles to them.
Oh.
They have forms, they have brochures where they like 16-page brochure, I think it's 16 pages, where they explain how you can support the organization while you're still alive or after your death, and legal
Yeah.
forms and support. They will they will take anything. Um,
They're good business. They're savvy.
it seems so. There's not a lot of transparency, unfortunately. There's only every now and then there's things that make the news or things that are uh, public record. Like when they
Mm.
sold their last compound in Brooklyn, New York, and they built a new Bethel in Warwick, New York, a little bit more in the countryside. The new compound they built is 1.6 million square feet. It took them
Oh,
4 years, and
right.
they had 27,000 volunteers show up. This whole thing was built with voluntary labor.
Yeah. Wow.
People quit their job and moved. They sold property to be able to move and live there for half a year to support the work because in their eyes, they're doing work for God.
Of course. True
When they
believer.
were, yeah, exactly. When they were done, they sold the compound that they had used up until then in Brooklyn, and they sold it for 2.2 billion US dollars.
Oh, money, money, money. I mean, follow the money. Often that's a sign of cults as well, where you can do a little look and a trace and say what's really driving this organization. And that seems incredible.
Just to put some numbers behind some of those things, the studying, how much they have to read. Like, because early on I said witnesses are kept so busy just consuming this information.
Yeah.
There was an old study. It is an older study, and that number is not accurate anymore, but it gives an interesting indication, I think. Some of that has been replaced through videos where witnesses don't read anything or not as much anymore. Now they're consuming videos that are being released regularly.
Yeah.
But back in 1981, somebody actually counted the pages, what a witness was expected to read in a year, and it was over 3,000 pages. of material.
Right. And they're
That's why
obviously
you're
trying to
so
memorize
busy.
it. They're obviously trying to memorize some of these responses as
Yeah,
well, are they? Mm.
yes. I mean, like we said earlier on, there's a lot of repetition, but yeah, it's
Mm.
being repeated a lot, which is
Interesting.
why
So,
a, a lot of that material is not necessarily interesting because there's so much repetition. When you're a new joiner, it's all interesting, and every now and then there's something that's deep, the deeper things of God, when something a little bit more complicated about prophecy or history is expounded on. But a lot of it is just like, here's what you got to do, here's how you fix all your problems.
yeah.
The meetings that I'd mentioned earlier on, it's very much like business affairs. People dress up, it looks like a business meeting, somebody stands on stage, it's very catechistic. There is song. The songs are not necessarily exciting either. And it's really just, it's like school. It's like going to school.
Do they sing heartily? I mean, just do they, or is it just
Some
rote
some
singing?
do. Unfortunately, it's not always the people who can sing who sing the most heartily, but it can be joyous. Like some of
Yeah.
the events, some of the meetings that Witness have are conventions, large
Yes.
gatherings. Some of those are international with like tens of thousands of people. That can be very emotional. When you step into a stadium and there's
Yeah.
30,000 people singing in unison in different languages, that
Yeah.
can be very moving, very powerful. Yes.
Wow. And so you just said different languages. Is that because the same tunes are sung with the same lyrics in different languages across the world? Is there a pattern of, well, there will be acceptable songs?
Yeah, there's a song book. Those lyrics are translated, and everybody sings. The degree of uniformity among witnesses is astounding because of the layout of these meetings and the material being produced for everybody, and that's what's being studied. You could be anywhere on the planet on any given Sunday and go into a meeting, and the exact same material is going to be studied. The same songs will be sung.
On the same Sunday. Oh, so it's
Yeah,
a whole worldwide.
everybody
Yeah.
does the same thing. Yeah, they're not necessarily
Ah,
on the same at the same time, and some people may have the meeting on a Saturday, but in that week, everybody studies the same material.
interesting. So the uniformity is often a feature of a culture group, and there's this pretend unity that they often preach about. So you would say that that's fear, where everyone's supposed to sort of think the same in many ways, speak the same.
Yeah, there's just a really interesting degree of conformity pressures, right? Witnesses will often present their uniformity as unity,
Yes,
but it's much more than that. Yeah.
that's our
Um,
favourite line. Gloria Vale has a big doctrine of unity, and those who leave say, no, no, this was uniformity, or actually, this was
yeah,
conformity. There's a big
yeah.
difference, isn't there? So, what are the dangers of not being in unity? I guess because that often tips us into the culty sphere.
Yes, it's very interesting. When you come and I mean the way people dress and the language they speak, there's a lot of jargon. If you don't use the right terms, witnesses will know immediately that you're not an active member. Most likely, you're a person who's never been a member, and those people are called worldly. You're a worldly person. If you're new and you attend a meeting, you're there for a second, third time, a couple of weeks later, you come back, witnesses will look at you, somebody who's interested.
Okay.
And often that is a label that is used. Like when a witness reaches out to you in the recruiting work and you are friendly and you take the magazine and they come back the next weekend and they invite you to the meeting and you show up, then you are labeled an interested person.
Okay.
And you will be love bombed. So looking different in that sense or in that instance is going to be it will result in a very positive experience because
Mm-hmm.
witness will try extra hard to be
Mm.
nice and welcoming to you and display personal interest in you. They will strike up conversations and try and follow up. They will invite you. It's great. The love bombing is strong and it's very nice.
Yeah.
But similar to the asking questions, once you are a member,
Mm.
when you cannot ask those questions anymore, you must not deviate as much from the way you dress and groom yourself and the way you speak. Um,
Yeah.
and those pressures, again, they just had a really curious relaxation of rules, I think in September 2023, where
Okay.
men are now allowed to grow beards. Before
Oh,
then, that was not, it was frowned upon. It was not encouraged.
Did Charles
And
Taze Russell have a beard, or could he not grow one?
he had a beard. He had a very large, bushy beard. And that's
Interesting.
part of what I mentioned early on when the second leader really tried to change things up to separate, I guess,
Yeah.
his the organization under his leadership from the organization under the previous leadership. And
Interesting.
there is a documented story where the second leader met, I think it was in Germany, with the Bethelites in Germany, the branch there, and they requested money for a new printing machine. And they all had grown beards in imitation of the first leader. And he was there and he looked at the man in charge of this branch. He looked at him and said, you know, if you shave that thing off, you will get your money. And the entire culture changed, and then witnesses were not allowed. It was not put in writing as far as I know, but the culture was there, and it was reinforced. It went to the point that if you look into some of the older Jehovah's Witnesses material where they display Jesus, Jesus is clean shaven.
Honestly, I was about to say, did Jesus have a beard? Yeah.
They
Wow.
showed images of Jesus not having a beard.
Right, interesting. So you've got some pretty classic, if you look at the BITE model, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. We're starting to fall into some of these pretty classic categories of cults, aren't we?
Yeah.
In what ways is the thought control and that was the indoctrination sort of process, but the emotional control, what are the threats that are being held over members? Because it's always hard to leave a cult. I think it's one of the defining features of a cult. How difficult is it to leave this group?
Exactly. What happens if you try to leave? Exactly. Yeah. So in the emotion control space, it's really interesting. It's not as, I think, as a parent, it's not as easy to identify control mechanisms when it comes to emotions as it is in some of the other areas, if you want to look at it through the lens of the BITE model. And I think that is because witnesses de-emphasize emotionality. They're not very emotional. They're not very charismatic.
Yes.
They emphasize the cognitive aspect of their belief. It's all about learning, knowledge that leads to everlasting life, studies, teaching tools. If you were to attend a meeting and be very emotionally expressive, you would probably have invited to a meeting to be encouraged to maybe not be quite as emotional.
Tone it down. You don't. They're not interested in me, then, are they? I can tell.
It's very muted emotions in general, which has interesting effects in terms of facial expressions. Humor is often very odd, often feels very forced. When somebody from the governing body releases a video, giving a speech, giving a sermon, and makes a quote unquote joke, it's really odd. Like you can see the true believers laugh. And if you're not, like for me, it's just like, that's not funny. That's just weird, but like you feel the pressure to laugh because everybody around you is laughing. But there's a lot of the emotionality seems very stunted almost. Emotions are used as emotion regulation because the outlook and a lot of what witnesses focus on is very negative. And then they use what's called emotional forecasting, but focus on the future. Okay, you're spending all this time reading all this material, you're going out and service knocking on strangers' doors, which most people don't like, right? You go to all these meetings that are boring, your children don't want to be there, but it's all worth it because in the future, here's a promise. And it's worth it. And, then you see that in their literature. You see all these depictions of the future where everybody's happy, in a perfect situation in paradise, eating fruit, petting pandas, living in log cabins, which is apparently the ideal scenario. Yeah.
So their theological sort of views are apocalyptic in that there will be an ending, but that their best hope really for most Jehovah's Witnesses would be that they get to live in paradise versus a special group of 144,000. They are the ones who will have entry to heaven, and then everyone else is annihilated. And I find that to be quite an interesting concept within the Jehovah's Witnesses theologically. I'm wondering what one needs to do to make the 144,000.
That's really curious, and it plays into what you just had asked me about the emotional aspect, because fear is used a lot among Jehovah's Witnesses. There are lots of depictions of future persecution where you see videos and images of Jehovah's Witnesses huddled up in the basement or in the attic and the stormtroopers coming in because the end has just arrived. And then there's images of witnesses standing on the street and the police and the military are shooting at the sky at the angels, but Jehovah and Jesus are protecting them. There's a lot of, Steve Hassan calls it phobia indoctrination. There's imagery that is designed to make you afraid. And what's really upsetting about this for me is that there is no distinction, like in the audience or who consumes material, there's no distinction between the children and the adults. So the children are required to consume this information as well. And if there's images of people being shot at, of people being dead in the street, children are required to look at this. There's symbolic illustrations of Babylon the Great and like the prostitute of the book of Revelation riding on this wild beast, which looks demonic. Like it looks scary. And there's images of that, and she'll look at this, and this is the stuff that you will never forget. Like this is frequently something ex-witnesses bring up. They remember these images that they had to look at in books that are designed for children even.
Yes. So the anxiety levels of children, I'm wondering about the link between the unemotional adult, the trauma that some of these things, children that might experience in the group. And we're going to just touch on the fact that clearly there's a lot of abuse inside the Jehovah Witness, because we've had the Royal Commissions in various countries looking into abuse here in Australia and now New Zealand, and the Jehovah Witnesses were fighting tooth and nail to have their names suppressed and not be participants in it, because we don't have a care relationship. People come voluntarily with their children to our church and we're not, in charge of them or in any way. And so a lot of, you've got abuse, because cults always have abuse, don't they? That's one of the features, exploitation
I would
and
say
abuse.
so.
And cover-ups. And so one of the issues there is a sense that children don't feel safe and they don't feel like they could speak up, because you're in a culture where people don't generally ask questions, and when they do something, they might be taken to a meeting. So kids have learned young, you don't share your emotions, you don't talk about things that have happened.
It's really traumatic for some of these children, because they're treated like adults. They are asked to dress like adults, to behave like adults, to study what adults do. So the punishment for somebody who is a sinner, who doesn't obey, who doesn't follow the rules, is ultimately going to be death. And children are aware of that. They're like, okay, if I don't make it, right? If I don't get baptized by a certain time, right? Or if I do something wrong, if I have the wrong desires, or if I bought an ice cream rather than donate that money, I may be killed next weekend. It's really tough.
So it's that constant anxiety. So it's always looking over your back. Who's shooting darts at you? Who's not happy with how you're behaving? And so huge levels of anxiety develop. And just reading that study I referenced earlier around well-being and health, it was very clear that there are serious mental health impacts for people who grow up in these areas. There are a lot of these groups have abuse. Let's just be blunt with it. It's a terrible track record with cults. It's one of the identifying features. And the Jehovah Witness has a very damaging belief or doctrine about the two-witness rule, which makes no sense, because a lot of abuse happens behind closed doors. That's usually what an abuser tries to do. Tell me about the damaging impact that has.
Yeah, well, it's essentially so the rule is that to establish anything that would result in what witnesses call a judicial action, which is the action that is taken to remove somebody from the congregation, i.e. punish somebody for committing a sin and not being sufficiently remorseful. It's the same process no matter what kind of sin occurred. Yeah. Unless the Jehovah's Witness steps forward themselves and confesses and admits to having committed a sin, if they're essentially accused by somebody else, there need to be at least two people to the incident. So if somebody says, I was sexually harassed or molested by somebody else, unless the other person confesses that they did it, no action will be taken by the congregation.
Wow.
And in a case of child sexual abuse, I mean, obviously, the abuser will make sure there is no witnesses around. So essentially, the children have no recourse. If they're the best thing that can happen is to tell the parents, and the parents believe them, and then the parents take action. But that's actually happened to a friend of mine. It's just, and it just shows how some of these rules, when you're so ideological, so religious, so fanatic about certain rules, if you're that, and it doesn't allow for real life situations. So, friend of mine has a teenage daughter, and she was sexually molested, and there was no witness. So the mother brought it up to the elders of the congregation. They're like, well, there's no witness, nothing's going to happen, i.e., you will keep going back to the meetings twice a week. Your abuser is going to be there. You're expected to be, treat them nice and well and understanding. And again, I mean, there's some older literature. The more recent literature is usually a little bit more safe as far as the impact on the organization is concerned. But in the older literature, they pretty much say expressis verbis that, like, okay, you've been raped, but you need to be understanding. The rapist is also just a human being, and you need to still show love and be loving towards your rapist.
Forgive and forget, of course, and never talk to it again. Never speak about it.
Because if you do, now you're committing the sin because you're slandering, and then you can be punished. And that's what happened to my friend. She brought it up to the elders. The elders said, well, there's no witness, so there's nothing we can do. Leave it in Jehovah's hands. And she's like, no, I'll bring it to the police.
Wow.
So her daughter's abuser is currently in prison.
Goodness.
Right? So it was established as a fact that this indeed happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
The police could establish it, but the judicial, the leaders, they couldn't figure it out.
I mean, they have processes and techniques and tools, and I guess ways of determining what happened, and identifying evidence and whatnot that elders just don't have. And that's really the crux of things.
They don't want to have it either, do they? They don't want to deal with issues of abuse.
I think some of the individuals, if they had tools and knowledge at their disposal, I'm sure they would try and do their best. I mean, I think the vast majority of these people are good people. They're brainwashed, right? So they feel they need to follow the rules, or they will die when Armageddon comes, right? Yeah. So but I admit, in some of these cases, it's really difficult for me to be empathetic with some of these sort of middle managers or family members who I'm like, I understand where you're coming from, but we're still family. I'm still your son, or your brother, or, some of that is really difficult. But so my friend who brought this to the police, so then it was established beyond reasonable doubt, is in prison now. This was not the way the organization handles things.
No.
So for one, which is really interesting, I don't think I'm very confident this is not necessarily common, but the organization paid for the abuser's lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
And because my friend sort of made the organization look bad, she is viewed as the bad person in this scenario. Yes. I don't know how they view the abuser, like when a court determines that, yes, you did do that and you belong in prison. But it's bizarre to think that a mother was punished for bringing the sexual abuse of her daughter to the police.
Yeah.
That you would be punished for that, rather than the congregation rallying around this family, this single mother, and helping that family and helping that child. That just is one of those things.
Yes, I know some of that's very tough. I know some of the former Glorivale members said, they said, I've got to be honest, it wasn't necessarily the abuse that has created the great amount of trauma. It's what happened after the abuse. It was the response of the group and the people that should be around you, supporting you, unable to do that, feeling at that point alone and rejected and unable to speak up. Very devastating impact on people.
It's jarring. Like, this is an organization where people will often talk about the love that they feel. They call each other brothers and sisters, right? They portray themselves as willing to die for their belief and for each other. And then because you did something that's not necessarily, that's not where there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a sin. It's not like she broke the rules or anything like
Yeah.
that. She did something that the leadership looks at as like, you made us look bad.
And so I think there are a lot of themes here that we will pick up on in the part 2 conversation. So why don't we catch up with our chat in our next episode? I want to thank
Sounds
you
great.
for coming along, giving us an understanding of the organisation that we'll be chatting about next time. So Thanks everyone for joining us on Cult Chat today. Thanks also to Plains FM. Followers, you can join us and like us. We're on Facebook. We've got Spotify, Apple, you name it, we're there. So share it with your friends and make sure you join us for the next episode. Thank you so much, Andre. We're incredibly grateful.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you.
All right, listeners, we'll be back soon.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.